Hello. High-speed rail offers the optimum means for inner-city travel in America. The current over-reliance on automobiles and airplanes creates many problems, including traffic congestion, airport delays, and inefficient use of energy resources. President Obama provided initial funding for high-speed rail projects as part of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act in 2009. Unfortunately, Congress decided to terminate continued funding for this essential component of transportation infrastructure. Restoring proper funding for President Obama's vision for high-speed rail will produce significant economic and environmental advantages. Plan. The United States federal government should substantially increase its investment in high-speed rail projects by creating an inner-city passenger rail account within the United States Department of Transportation. As recommended by the National Surface Transportation Policy and Revenue Study Commission, $8.1 billion per year from the general federal revenues will be designated for the construction of high-speed rail corridors throughout the United States. Observation 1. Inherency. Current federal support for high-speed rail projects is inherently flawed. A. Congress has blocked funding for President Obama's high-speed rail vision. Jerry Surinsky, he's a journalist from the Buffalo News, November 2011. Congress on Thursday shut down federal funding for President Obama's high-speed rail program, meaning that its extent in upstate New York might amount to nothing more than the local rail improvements that were previously funded. The House, by a vote of 298 to 121, approved a $182 billion bill aimed at averting a government shutdown by setting fiscal 2012 spending levels for transportation, housing, agriculture, commerce, and several smaller programs. Legislation also extends funding for other parts of the federal government through December 16th. The bill, which the Senate later passed Thursday by a vote of 70 to 30, includes no money for a high-speed rail program, even though Obama had requested $8 billion. Subpoint B. Federal infrastructure spending undervalues all passenger rail programs. Staff report of the House Committee on Transportation Infrastructure, October 2009. The discrepancy in historical federal investment between highways, aviation, and inner-city passenger rail is staggering. Between 1958 and 2008, nearly $1.3 trillion has been invested in our nation's highways, and over $473 billion in aviation. Federal investment in passenger rail began in 1971 with the creation of the National Rail Passenger Corporation, Amtrak. Between 1971 and 2008, only $53 billion has been invested in passenger rail. Plan offers the following advantages. Advantage number 1. Federal investment in high-speed rail properly prepares for the end of the era of oil. A. Failure to prepare for the peak of oil supplies will create massive economic disruption. Ron Rhodes, The Coming Storm, 2010. Some experts who have assessed the declining oil in the world are now warning humankind that the party is over. Kali Alek, president of the Association for the Study of Peak Oil and a physics professor at the University in Sweden, warns that we have all enjoyed the greatest party that the world has ever seen, the Great Oil Party. After the climax comes the decline, when we have to sober up and face the fact that the party is coming to an end. Not only could the end of the party severely damage the global economy, he warns, but it could also lead to social and political unrest as various countries try to keep the party going even as the oil disappears. Subpoint B. Failure to prepare for the peaking of oil supplies risks endless war. Ron Rhodes, The Coming Storm, 2010. War may seem to be inevitable with nations' face-offs over oil. Of course, one would hope that oil wars would be waged merely with cash and not conventional weaponry. However, many experts are concerned that the outbreak of weaponized war over oil remains a serious possibility. One expert laments that, despite attempts by one country or region to maintain its standard of living at the expense of others, could lead to oil war. Subpoint C. High-speed rail moves the United States beyond reliance on oil for transportation. Daniel Wood, staff of the Christian Science Monitor, February 2011. To supporters of high-speed rail expansion, however, U.S. transportation must move beyond its reliance on oil. High-speed rail is the only form of intercity transportation that has a 45-year record of moving people without oil, says Anthony Pearl, professor of political science at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, Canada, and a fellow at the Post-Carbon Institute. That's why 30 countries around the world have done this, and the U.S. and Canada are just laggards, he says. If people want to get where they're going between cities, they are going to need high-speed rail because flying and driving will only become more and more costly. Advantage number 2. Federal investment in high-speed rail significantly reduces transportation sector sources of greenhouse gas emissions. Subpoint A. Greenhouse gas emissions threaten significant harm to the health of the planet. Patricia Parentlow is professor of law at University of Vermont Law School, summer 2010. Global climate change is not only unequivocal as the IPCC fourth assessment proclaimed, it is happening now, it is accelerating, and no one knows for sure what lies ahead as the nations of the world struggle in a race against time to achieve an unprecedented level of cooperation on greenhouse gas limits before it is literally too late to save humanity. The polar ice caps, the Arctic, the massive glaciers in the Himalayas and Andes are melting faster than predicted. Sea levels are rising faster than predicted. The oceans slowly turning acidic. Tropical storms are intensifying. Salt water is contaminating coastal aquifers and degrading estuaries. Lake levels are dropping. Runoff is increasing. Flood peaks are growing. Droughts are intensifying. Wildfires are spreading. Pests and invasive species are expanding. Diseases are moving into population centers. Ecosystems are shifting poleward and upward. Migratory species patterns are changing. Cold water habitat is shrinking, and more deadly heat waves are expected. And none of that takes into account the potential for abrupt climate change, which could unleash truly catastrophic Hollywood disaster movie scenarios. Subpoint B. The U.S. transportation infrastructure is a major source of greenhouse gas emissions. Tony Dungsick, he's an analyst of Public Interest Research Group Education Fund, High-Speed Rail, fall 2010. Transportation in the United States is heavily dependent on oil and is a major contributor to both global warming and air pollution problems in cities throughout the nation. Although home to a mere 4.5% of the world's population, the United States emit nearly 1/5 of the world's global warming emissions. In the United States, the transportation sector is responsible for 33% of these emissions. Subpoint C. High-speed rail significantly reduces greenhouse gas emissions. James McCommons, he's professor of English at Northern Michigan University, 2009. Passenger trains consume 17% less energy than airplanes and 21% less than cars for every passenger mile, according to the Department of Energy. The average intercity bus passenger train produces 60% less carbon dioxide per passenger mile than a car and 50% less than an airplane. Subpoint Advantage 3. Federal investment in high-speed rail would provide an effective jobs program for Americans. Subpoint A. Current levels of unemployment represent a significant problem. Staff report on the House Committee on Transportation Infrastructure, 2009. Since the recession began in December 2007, the unemployment rate has doubled to 9.8%, representing an increase from 7 million to 15 million unemployed persons. Since that time, employment in manufacturing has fallen by 2.1 million. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, since 1998, the U.S. has lost more than 5.9 million manufacturing jobs. The current economic, environmental, and transportation challenges facing our nation require continued efforts to expand and invest in high-speed rail services. Subpoint B. Federal investment in high-speed rail will create millions of good jobs. Sienna Kaplan, analyst, 2010. Between this economic benefit and the work required to build and operate the trains, an American high-speed rail system could create millions of jobs. According to an analyst by the Midwest High-Speed Rail Association, building the national system will create up to 1.6 million construction jobs. The boost from the system could translate into up to 4.5 million additional permanent jobs. Manufacturing the trains will require additional workers. The MHSRA estimates up to 100,000 new jobs. Advantage 4. Federal investment in the high-speed rail will significantly